But guess what? You know, even as union membership contracts in the private sector, here as well as in Europe, it grows in the public sector. And the one thing that is really lethal right now, whether you're in California or Greece, is this enormous public sector pension liability. And it's monstrous. You know, some people say in California it's a $500 billion liability.
Hold on just a second, because I want to show you something. Can we show this now, or do we need to take a break? We'll show it after the break. I'm going to show you some numbers that I don't think have been seen yet on TV of pensions and how out of whack this is. It's breathtaking. Next. America, we're back with Neil Ferguson. He is the author of a new book, High Financier, The Life and Time of Sigmund Warbug. He is also with Harvard University, and one of the most honest guys on the economy I think I have heard ever on television, and I appreciate your honesty and your candor. We were just talking in the break about the pensions, and this is, if you were going to destroy America, you would unleash the unions, you would cut off our oil capabilities, you'd spend like crazy, and you'd do nothing about these pensions, and you tell everybody that, because this is what's going to happen, they're going to tell you that they're going to fire teachers and firemen. Let me show you here, and if you would explain it, let me show you the pension fund. This is just in Illinois, how much they owe teachers and people on the Board of Ed in just Illinois. These are the people that they owe. The liability is $887 million. Now, if you look at this line by line, you can see who's getting the money. Here is years experience after, I think, 35 or whatever, you can retire. After 35 years, you can retire. These people are retiring. This person's retiring with 10 million, 10 million, 10 million, 26 million, 11 million, 10 million, 11 million, 9 million.
And this is assuming that they have maybe, I forget now how many years in retirement.
Yeah, I think it's
on defined
34 years,
right?
And you can retire at the age of 56.
And you assume that people live for a good long time after that.
29-year life expectancy.
29-year life expectancy. Now, the interesting thing about these deals is that these are defined benefit contributions. Now, if you have a private pension that you pay into because you're self-employed, you define the contribution you make, but the thing that defines your benefit is how successfully you invest that money. I know this because I do it myself.
Right.
If I was a public sector employee and had been in a public sector job for the last 20 or 30 years, I wouldn't need to have that worry because the guarantee is there. It's a benefit that's defined, and it's defined really at a high percentage of your final salary. Now, all over the Western world, in Europe and in the United States, this is the other big ticking time bomb. We know about the unfunded liabilities of Medicare and Social Security. What we hear much less about are these huge unfunded liabilities of, say, the Californian pension schemes. They're absolutely mind-blowing.
And when they say this, that they're the idea, well, all they ever say is they're going to have to fire teachers. They're going to have to fire. Well, yeah, either that or people are going to have to work until 65 and not get this pension. Is there any way, this is state of Illinois, any way to pay just the first page of this pension?
It's pretty implausible. And Illinois, along with, I think, New Jersey and California, is one of the states with the biggest fiscal crisis in its hands. Now, the interesting thing, Glenn, is the way the fiscal crisis spreads across the Atlantic. It spreads into the states first before it hits the federal government. But it is starting to happen in these states that impossible choices are suddenly being made. Well, we have very little time, actually, because I think in the next year or so, this problem becomes a problem for the federal government, because the feds will be asked to bail out these states, at which point the deficit goes from 10% of GDP to what, 12%, 13%? Right.
He's harsh and my mellow. When we come back, I want to talk about this book and what lessons we can learn from the past for tomorrow in America. Back in a second. All right, I'm with Neil Ferguson. He is the author of High Financier, The Lives and Time of Sigmund Warbug, who, this guy is, well, his family is conspiracy central, right?
Along with the Rothschilds.
Yes.
I also wrote a book, yeah.
That he's not the guy who came up with the Fed.
No, that was Paul, his uncle. He was very close. who actually moved to the United States before World War I and came up with the idea of giving the United States a central bank. Siegmund left Germany in the 30s to flee Hitler and set up a bank in London, started from scratch, S.G. Warburg, which when I was a young man back in the 80s was the dominant player in the City of London. Siegmund pretty much reinvented London as a financial centre. He was also a very key figure in the history of European integration. He invented the Eurobond market, and his great view was that you could bring Europe together much more successfully through finance than through politics.
So I have to tell you, Neil, this sounds like everything I'm against. It sounds like, I mean, this is what they're doing now. I mean, you familiar with mutually assured economic destruction of Tragedy and Hope with Carol Quigley, where we'll just tie all the economies together and then nobody can really get out of line.
So part of the point of writing a book like this, and the same was true of the history of the Rothschild family, was to try to disentangle the myth, the conspiracy theory from the historical reality, because it's absolutely clear that from the vantage point of somebody like Warburg, who'd lived through the Weimar Republic, who'd seen the rise of Hitler, that there was a certain nervousness about what democracy could do. In his experience, democracy had gone totally insane and elected Hitler. And the conclusion he came to is that really capitalism needs to be protected in some measure from the great tides of political
But isn't that what we have now? I mean, I have to tell you, I think the Fed created this problem. They created by protecting us from bubble crashes. They just kept making a bigger bubble and a bigger bubble and a bigger bubble, and it's about to pop.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about a figure like Siegmund Warburg is that he observes these great monetary miscalculations being made, not only in the 20s and 30s, but right the way through. In the 1970s, for example, we're sometimes told that this was a great era of regulated finance and everything was great until the dreadful deregulation of the 1980s. You've heard this story, Time Without Number, from Paul Krugman. You go back and look at Warburg's experience in the 70s, it was far from being stable. It was a highly regulated market in which inflation was running amok, mainly because the Fed and its counterparts in Europe were printing money and applying the principles of John Maynard Keynes. So I think this is an absolutely fascinating life because it illustrates how, in reality, finance and politics interact. How do financial institutions really wield power? I think if you go onto the internet and you look at some of the conspiracy sites, people have an intuition that they're powerful. My point is, yes, they are powerful, but let's look at how they really operate. Let's look at the documents. Let's go through the archives. Let's carefully look at the letters they wrote. Let's look at the meetings that actually happened between someone like Siegmund Warburg and Harold Wilson, the British Prime Minister, Richard Nixon. Look at the meetings that happened with Anwar Sadat, the Egyptian Prime Minister. We can document this story, and I think we can therefore understand it much better.
Last week, hold on 30 seconds. Last week, Road to Serfdom, we talked about Road to Serfdom, became hugely popular. Anti-Road to Serfdom, or pro, or in the middle?
I think ambivalent. I mean, the only way to sum up someone like Warburg was that he had seen what could go wrong, and this made him hugely cautious.
Did you address Weimar in here?
Absolutely,
okay,
which is where he was forged.
High financier, the life and times of Siegmund Warburg, Neil Ferguson, extraordinarily bright man, trustworthy man. Read the book. Back in a minute. Good thing this audience reads, because there's a lot to read. Here's the latest from me. It is fiction. The Overton Window. You want to see a possible scenario? It is fiction. But a lot of it is fact. Check it out. Bookstores everywhere, The Overton Window. From New York, we'll see you tomorrow. Good night, America.